Mark the width of the top at the corner of a sheet of plywood, and then mark and drill the saw mounting bolt holes at each corner. An important part of the laying out the top is to mark the innermost travel of the saw rails at different angles. Not only at the different swing angles, but also tilted and swung to make sure there's clearance for the sliding miter saw rails inside the dust hood at the back. This is one of the sides for the stand, and at the bottom back on each side I'm going to add an extension, give it a little more stability with the casters. I also need a rabbet in the back edge for the back panel of the stand, and it's easier to do that before I add these pieces. So I've set up a dado blade to cut a rabbet the thickness of the back panel. I'm just going to saw the kerfs for these extensions. So I've put a blade in that'll cut a 1/8 inch kerf because I'm going to use pieces of 1/8 inch plywood as the splines to reinforce the joint between this extension. To glue the extension on, I'm just going to add some glue to the spline groove. To hold things aligned. Wax paper, some glue blocks, and some plank. And then we'll pull it together with a bar clamp. Each side needs a shallow dado to accept the shelf. So I've installed a 15 millimeter dado stack, and I've set the fence so that the dado for this extension becomes a rabbet, and for the duration here becomes a dado. After cutting out the top, glue doublers or thickeners to the underside of the front and sides of the top. We need to cut a dado on the underside of the top for each side to engage. Notice that the dados are centered over the saw mounting bolt holes. I've temporarily assembled the floor and the sides with cauls and the clamp blocks. And what I'm going to do, mark the holes for the top. I've got 4 bolts with spacers here that are approximately equal to the foot on the saw. So I'm going to mark the length of the bolts at each of the 4 locations. And now I'm going to drill holes down to these marks. I'll drill cross holes for nuts for the bolts that I'll embed here for the bottom end of the bolts. At the back of the stand, the sides are rabbeted to accept the back. And I'm just going to mark the floor because I cut a shallow rabbet into the floor for the back panel to nest into. I'm going to use 1/4" or 6mm plywood for the back panel. Okay, this is one of the 4 bolts that will hold the saw and the top onto the sides. I put a couple of spacers on here to simulate the saw base and the top. Little oil on the threads. And we're going to put the nut on this cross drilling. And I'm going to plug the holes with some auto body filler. I keep this stuff around for using as a filler on painted work. And we're just going to mix up maybe a tablespoon hardener, cream hardener. And I'm going to shove these full of filler. Half an hour we can sand this smooth. Here's the stand upside down. I bolted the top in place with the 4 long bolts, and I've used spacers instead of that would take the thickness of the feet on the miter saw. And I'm just putting the floor in place. So I've clamped it back in place with square blocks and cauls and the bar clamps. And from the bottom up, I'm drilling holes pilot holes through the floor up into each sidewall. And then I'm putting driving screws into those holes. toe screwing it, if you will. I installed the back panel with a few screws. I still have the stand upside down, and I've installed cleats, front and rear, which will serve to attach the front and rear skirts. But also, importantly, will serve as pivot blocks for the caster mounting plates. I've attached hinges and casters to the caster mounting plates and an extend retract lever, and these mounting plates will sit on the caster pivot blocks on these cleats, and here will be the caster extended position, caster retracted. Casters retracted, they will clear. Casters extended, we'll lift the cabinet off the floor about a centimeter, almost half an inch. So I'm going to attach these front and rear skirts with screws from the cleats into the skirt, front and rear, and 3/4 off blocks to help support the skirt, with screws into the sidewall and screws into the skirt. Corner block. The front skirt will be supported only at one corner. I had to move a couple of casters. I found that if the swivel casters were pivoted towards the rear and I pushed down on the pedal to extend the casters, the cabinet would kind of rock forward towards me and then level out a little bit awkwardly. So I moved both the casters forward a couple of centimeters, almost an inch. And to get the maximum forward position here, I took this skirt and hogged out some materials with a full stack of blades on my dado saw, on the table saw. So just remove some material so I can move the casters as absolutely far forward as possible. And then I had to move this caster inward so that it would clear the extend retract lever. On my original miter saw stand, I had put the fixed casters at the front and the swivel casters at the rear. And I thought it'd be a little bit easier to maneuver if I could have the fixed casters at the rear and kind of steer the stand into place wherever I wanted it to go. But it might be preferable to put the fixed casters near the front and the swivel casters near the back. Or, the thought enters my mind is, what if you want to have all 4 casters swivel? Then I think the stand might not be very stable with the casters extended. I think there should be at least a sort of a triangle of casters underneath it. But here's the caster extend retract lever, retracted, extended. And here's the pedal to make the latch foot operated. There's a foot pad, a couple of ears, mounting ears, and the left mounting ear incorporates a pawl that engages this latch that I've nailed and glued to the left side of the cabinet. The pedal rocks on a number 10 screw, and you'll see I've glued a little pad here to the top of the extend retract lever. That's simply to keep the pedal from rocking too far where it's awkward to get your foot on it. Okay. And there's the way it latches down. Rock it back to unlatch and retract the pedals. I need to clear up a discrepancy from what you've seen in this video up till now and what my plans call for with respect to the cross members on the underside of the top. I've removed the rear dust baffle assembly and removed the saw. And the final version of the underside of the top consists of a 3-inch full width cross member and a 4-inch full width cross member. The two side members should be 12¼ inches long. And you can see here that I've spliced it a little bit differently than that, but essentially that's what should happen. We should have two side members 12¼ inches long and a full width cross member at the back here of 23 inches.